came home early from work that day, just tired, just hungry. I opened the door and froze. There were candles on the dining table, wine glasses. I didn't own a charcuterie board. Soft music played. My sister was hosting a dinner party in my house. I wasn't invited. She looked up mid-laugh and said, "Oh, didn't think you'd be back so soon." Her husband raised a glass and winked like this was all a joke. One of her friends leaned over to whisper, "Who's that?" And my sister replied, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's just staying here for now." Just staying. In the house I paid for. The house I painted with my own two hands. The house I missed birthdays for. Worked overtime for. Sacrificed vacations and sleep and weekends for. I didn't say a word. I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and left the house for 3 days. No one texted. No one called. I guess they assumed the burden had finally removed herself. But I wasn't gone. I was meeting with my realtor. I was signing papers. I was changing locks. And exactly 1 week later, while they were out shopping for patio furniture, a moving truck pulled up. The new owners arrived. My sister called me. In a panic, screaming, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe find someone else's life to hijack." Then I hung up. My name is Millie Bobby Brown. I'm 35. I'm an interior designer based in Vermont. Or I used to be, before everything in my life got redefined without my permission. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who has to fight to prove she owns her own life. But when your family decides you're a burden, you don't get to stay silent anymore. The sun had just started to dip below the rooftops of Burlington, casting long shadows across my backyard, where the oak tree stood unmoving like a quiet witness to everything. I was in the laundry room folding a pile of fresh towels, the scent of lavender still clinging to the fabric. The washing machine hummed gently in the background, and for a moment, everything felt calm. Contained. Safe. That house was mine. I had bought it 3 years ago using the inheritance my grandmother left me. It was a modest colonial-style place with a wooden porch. Pale blue walls in the hallway, a farmhouse sink I restored by hand, a kitchen filled with flea market finds I loved more than any catalog item. Every inch of it bore my mark. My effort. My quiet defiance against everything I'd been told I couldn't do. The phone rang. It was Emily, my older sister, calling from Boston. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, expecting perhaps something close to warmth. "Hey," she said. "Just got back from dinner. Italian place near Back Bay. Overrated, honestly." I asked about the weather. She said it was cold but manageable. I asked how her hotel was. She and Mark, her husband, were supposed to be staying there while their condo got fumigated. She brushed off the question. There was no real conversation. Just her voice, clipped and distracted like she was checking a box. After a few minutes, I said goodbye. I thought the call had ended, but it hadn't. The line was still open. I heard the rustle of fabric, maybe her slipping off her coat, and then Mark's voice, casual and low. "That your mom?" "Nope," Emily replied. "Millie's still whining about that leak upstairs. It's her house technically, but I mean, it won't be forever." I stopped breathing. Mark laughed. "We'll get her to sign it over. She's a burden. Always has been." "She folds easy," Emily said. "Just a little guilt here and there. She caves." The words dropped like stones. I stood there, towel half folded, staring blankly at the wall. The machine kept spinning, but the room had gone silent. Or maybe it was just my head flooding with a kind of static. Something cold broke open in my chest. Burden. That word. It wasn't new. It had lingered in our family for years, unspoken, sometimes flung at me with disgust. But hearing it now, so cleanly, so clearly, stripped of any performance, it was different. It landed with surgical precision. They weren't just staying with me temporarily. They were plotting. I placed the towel back on the pile. The sun was now gone, and the only light came from the old bulb overhead, casting everything in harsh yellow. That house, my house, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a set I had accidentally built for someone else's play. I hung up the phone manually and stood there for what felt like an hour. The sound of water dripping faintly from the upstairs leak seemed louder than before. Invasive. Impossible to stop. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, in my house, filled with furniture I carried in by hand. And all I could think about was that word. Burden. It had a weight. But not just emotional. It was historical. In my family, it had a genealogy. I remembered being 17 and telling my parents I didn't want to go to law school. My father, John, barely looked up from his newspaper. My mother, Margaret, just sighed like I'd confessed to a crime. "What are you going to do then?" she asked. "Paint for a living?" I told them I'd been accepted to the University of Vermont for art. That I'd work to pay for it. That I'd take care of myself. They didn't laugh, but they didn't believe me either. They called my decision irresponsible, my determination idealistic. My entire adult life since then had been about proving them wrong. I waited tables during the day. I freelanced graphic design work at night. I rented a tiny studio above a bakery that smelled like burnt sugar. I graduated. I survived. And when my grandmother passed, she left me just enough to put a down payment on this house. She was the only one who had ever believed in me. She used to call me her light in the dark. That phrase stayed with me long after the funeral. It was the reason I made the walls in the living room sky blue and planted lavender in the garden. It was the reason I worked double shifts to pay down the mortgage early, skipped vacations, and lived frugally. This house wasn't just a house. It was a monument. Every corner carved out of loneliness, sacrifice, and hope. So when Emily called months ago and said she and Mark had both been laid off and just needed a place to land, I didn't hesitate. I let them in. Told myself this would be healing. Family again, like it used to be. I scrubbed the guest bathroom until it shined. Repainted the living room a soft cream because Emily said blue made her feel cold. I bought a new rug. I said yes to everything just to keep the peace. But peace isn't always reciprocal. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift. Small things, at first. Emily started calling it our home in conversation. Mark changed the name on the Wi-Fi. They moved their coats to the front closet. At dinner, they talked about renovations. They might do someday, not as guests, but as owners. I ignored it, chalked it up to stress, or entitlement, or some version of forgetfulness. But deep down, I knew better. They were painting over my life, not literally, but symbolically, one careful layer at a time. And I let them. Because part of me still hoped that maybe if I was good enough, selfless enough, they'd finally stop seeing me as a burden. But now I knew. They never had any intention of seeing me as anything else. I looked around my home. The walls I painted. The couch I reupholstered. The table I sanded until my fingers bled. Suddenly, none of it felt solid. The ground beneath me hadn't shifted. It had already shifted, and I was just now realizing I was standing on the edge. And somehow, even with all I'd done, I was still the one expected to make space. I closed the journal I had started keeping again. On the last page, I wrote only one sentence. This is my house. But for how much longer? It started small. A password changed without notice. A bill showing up with Mark's name instead of mine. I found out about the Wi-Fi when I got logged out of my own network and had to ask Emily for the new password. She didn't look up from her phone when she said it. Just rattled it off like I was some tenant renting a room. I wrote it down in silence and walked away. Then came the bills. Electric, gas, internet. All addressed to Mark Thompson. He never asked. I never gave permission. The first time I saw one, I stood by the mailbox for a long time, the paper fluttering in my hand as if waiting for me to rip it in half. But I didn't. I brought it inside and stacked it with the others. At some point, Emily started referring to me differently, subtly, surgically. We ran into a neighbor while I was weeding the front flower bed. Emily waved like she owned the place. This is Miss Millie Thompson, she said, smiling too brightly. She's been with us here for a while now. Not my sister. Not, this is her home. Just with us. It happened again and again, with the mailman, the pest control guy, at the pharmacy. Her tone always the same. Faint. Practiced. Condescending. One evening, I came home from work and paused at the bottom of the stairs. Something felt off. The scent of fresh paint hit me before I saw it. The hallway, once a soft blue I chose to match the morning light, was now beige. Bland hotel lobby beige. Emily poked her head out from the kitchen. Doesn't it feel more grounded, she said. We're building something more mature now. Something lasting. I didn't answer. I walked up the stairs and shut my door. The next day, Mark casually mentioned converting the master bedroom, my bedroom, into a shared office. He stood in the doorway while I was folding laundry and said, "You'd be more comfortable in the guest room anyway. It's warmer. Quieter." He didn't say please. It wasn't a suggestion. That night, unable to sleep, I opened an old voice memo app on my phone to clear storage. One recording caught my eye. An automatic capture from a few days back, left running by accident. I pressed play. Emily's voice, distant but clear, she still thinks we actually like her. Mark laughed. She's easy. Just mention the stuff we've done for her. Fixing her car, whatever. Guilt's a tool. Emily again, honestly, we deserve this house more than she does. I stared at the ceiling of the guest room, where I now slept by quiet agreement. The window frame let in wind through a cracked seal. My blanket barely kept the cold out. I ran my hand across the worn armrest of my grandmother's chair, the only thing I had moved into the room. It was the last thing left that still felt like mine. They were rewriting my life, sentence by sentence, color by color. The walls no longer told my story. The air didn't carry my scent. Even my name, Miss Thompson, had become a stranger's title, and I let it happen. That night, I went to a cafe near the river and stayed until they turned off the lights. I did the same the next night, and the next. I couldn't bear to eat with them, to sit across from their calm, lying faces, to breathe in the same air that used to feel like home. The house wasn't dirty, it was contaminated. Not with mold or mess, but with something far more dangerous. With erasure. With the quiet kind of control that turns presence into background noise. Every word they spoke rewrote my place in that house, softened me, erased me. I found an old notebook buried under college notes and began writing again. Page after page, I recorded everything, each moment of dismissal, every time I was renamed, redefined, overwritten. I wasn't journaling to cope. I was documenting to survive. At the end of one entry, I wrote, "This is still my house, but somehow I'm becoming a shadow in it." My room, what was left of it, was just a place where I unrolled a sleeping bag and kept a few books on the floor. The walls were bare. My grandmother's chair sat in the corner like it didn't belong to me anymore, like it belonged to someone braver. And the photo, my favorite one of her, still sat on the dresser with its corner torn. I couldn't bring myself to tape it back together. Some things, once broken, never settle the same way again. Before bed, I opened the drawer that held the deed. I took it out and carried it into the bathroom. The mirror was fogged from the shower, but I stood there and waited. Waited for the glass to clear. Waited until I could see myself not as a guest, but as the woman who had let this happen. I let them take. I let them shrink me. If I didn't fight for what was mine, no one else would. And if they succeeded, if they made me believe I didn't belong, then I'd have nothing left. That thought alone was enough. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove to Montpelier. Frost still clung to the edges of the windshield, and the sky was a faint gray. I wore the gray coat my grandmother gave me at graduation, the one that still smelled faintly of her perfume. I met Ellen at her office, a little brick building behind a diner. We hadn't spoken in a year, but when I called her, she said yes without hesitation. I sat across from her at the oak desk and laid everything down, the deed, the final mortgage letter, every receipt I had ever kept. She reviewed them in silence, flipping through the papers slowly. Then she looked up and said clearly, without doubt, "Sarah, this house is yours. Sole owner. No liens. No cosigners. They have no legal claim." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But then she added, "If they try to establish cohabitation or claim contribution, it could get messy. Start documenting everything." That night, I placed a small recorder under the kitchen table. An old device Ellen lent me, something she'd used for clients who needed quiet truth. I checked the battery 3 times. The next day, I went about my usual routine, but this time, I was listening. I was ready. I heard Mark say, "She owes us. We've held this place together when she couldn't even fix the plumbing. If we present that, we've got a case." Emily replied, "We just need to make it sound fair. Shared ownership. If she signs, boom, it's done." I copied the recording onto a USB drive and hid it inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. The next afternoon, Emily came to my door with a manila folder and a cup of tea. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed. "I thought we could talk," she said. "Mark and I were thinking, maybe something formal. Just something to reflect reality. No need to make it ugly." She placed the folder on my desk. It was a draft contract titled Co-Ownership Understanding. I read every word. Every clause was a trap. I looked up and said, "I'll consider it." She smiled like she'd already won. I didn't sign it. I scanned the document and emailed it to Ellen that night. Her reply came quickly, "Legally worthless unless signed. But they're making moves. Be ready." I spent the next few days boxing what mattered: photos, my grandmother's handwritten recipes, old sketchbooks. I canceled my gym membership, redirected my mail, double-checked my savings. The house didn't feel like a home anymore, but I refused to let them take the last part of me that still believed in boundaries. That night, I sat on the floor of the guest room, holding the deed again. It felt heavier now, less like a paper, more like a verdict. Through the thin curtain, I saw Emily standing in the backyard on her phone. Her voice slipped through the glass. "If she doesn't give us a cut after the sale, I'll talk to Mom and Dad. She won't survive that." I stood completely still. It was never just about the house. It was about making me small enough to control. But I wasn't that small anymore. And I was finally ready. A week after deciding to sell, I stopped hiding it. David, the agent from Montpelier, came by to take listing photos. I didn't sneak him in. I let him walk through the front door with his camera bag and clipboard in full view. I didn't speak a word to Emily or Mark. But I left one of David's flyers face up on the kitchen counter. When I came home that evening, Emily was standing in the kitchen, flyer in hand. Her voice cracked slightly. "You're really doing this?" I didn't answer. I walked past her and shut my door. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. One sentence: "You can't make this decision alone. That house is family property." Not a question. An accusation. That night, a video call came through unexpectedly. My father's face filled the screen, red and furious. "Your mother told me everything," he spat. "What you're doing is disgraceful. Kicking your sister out after everything she's done for you." My mother sat beside him, silent, arms folded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Later that night, Emily sent an email. The subject: formal demand, family asset division. It was copied to my parents and to Mark's attorney. In it, she accused me of betrayal. Claimed I had secretly listed our shared home. Demanded 60% of the proceeds based on contributions. None of which were true. The tone was ice. I didn't recognize her voice in it anymore. Then the social media post came. Mark painting themselves as victims. He called me cruel, unstable, selfish. He posted a photo of the living room, carefully cropped to make it look like theirs. People commented. Old classmates. Neighbors. Strangers. One messaged me, "Is this true?" I sat in my car outside a bakery, scrolling through all of it like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I opened the glove box and pulled out the letter from my grandmother. The one I'd saved since college. I read it again. "You are not a burden. You are light. And light becomes clearer when everything else turns dark." The tears came hard, not from anger, but from years of exhaustion. Years spent trying to prove I wasn't what they said I was. For the first time, I wanted to disappear. But just as that thought crept in, my phone buzzed again. Clara. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Her message was simple. "I believe you. I always have." Emily was never who she pretended to be. I wrote back one word: "Thanks." Then I turned off my phone, closed my eyes, and let the silence in. Not hiding. Just breathing. I finalized the sale the next day. The paperwork was tight, clean, clear. The buyers were a young couple from Montpelier, starting a family. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Packing didn't take long. My life had already been reduced to essentials. My things, books, artwork, the chair, were boxed carefully. Emily and Mark's things I packed separately and placed in a storage unit across town. I left the receipt and access code on the kitchen counter. The last night in the house was silent. I wrote a short note in my own handwriting. Surprised a burden did this. The keys are under the sink. The house isn't yours anymore. I turned off the lights and walked out the same door my grandmother and I had used the day I moved in. The air was cold and clean. I didn't look back. By morning, the calls had started. 42 missed calls. "Mark, you think this is over? We'll see you in court." "Emily, why would you do this? So you could feel powerful? You'll end up alone. You always do." I deleted both messages. I drove toward Portland with the windows cracked just enough to let the wind in. The trees flanked the highway, dropping red and gold leaves like confetti. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. Just space. Just breath. I had left. I had saved myself. A week later, Aunt Linda reached out. She wanted a family Zoom meeting. Everyone, cousins, aunts, even the ones I hadn't heard from in years. One chance to tell the truth. I said yes. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I reviewed recordings. Compiled deeds. Ellen agreed to sit in with her camera off. When the meeting started, over 20 people joined. Emily and Mark were late. Their faces calm. Their voices smooth. Emily started, "We're here to clear up some misunderstandings." My father interrupted, his voice sharp. "You think this fixes anything? You humiliated your sister. You think this will make it right?" I didn't argue. I clicked play. Mark's voice filled the call. "She's a burden, play the guilt card, she'll sign." Then Emily, "She folds easy. She always has." The silence afterward was heavy. Unmistakable. Some turned away. Some covered their faces. My father stammered, "That's edited, anyone can fake that." I stayed calm. "I have the original. Ellen can verify chain of custody." Emily left the call. Mark followed. My mother stood up and walked off screen. My father said nothing more. Then I spoke. I told them the truth. About the nights I worked late, the years I struggled, the silence I endured. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said. "Just truth. The kind that exists whether you want it to or not." Some screens went dark. Others typed quiet apologies in the chat. A few stayed. Aunt Linda. Uncle James. A cousin who whispered, "You never sounded like a liar to me." A few days later, 3 emails came from relatives who said they were sorry. Who admitted they saw signs but said nothing. Then came the letter.no return address, just one sentence in my grandmother's handwriting: if they call you a burden, remember, only things that carry weight leave a mark. I cried quietly. Not out of grief. Out of relief. Portland felt different. In October. The light was soft. The air kind. I worked part-time at a community art center, teaching kids and women rebuilding their lives. I painted again, this time, in color. Yellows. Greens. Morning light. Clara and Mia came to visit. Mia gave me a drawing of a woman in front of a mountain. "You're the bravest teacher I know," she said. I held her tight. At the fall showcase, I displayed 3 paintings. The last one, titled Weight and Light, caught the eye of a local gallery. They asked me to exhibit. I said yes. I walked home that night and knew I hadn't lost anything. I'd just made space for something better. Point 1. Morning, I made tea and opened my journal. I wrote, "Sarah, you are no longer the name left off the family list. You are the builder of a world that doesn't need permission. You are not a burden. You are light." I signed my name with a steady hand, and for the first time, I believed every word.